December 2010. A police officer walks his dog along Gilgo Beach, Long Island, New York. What he finds changes everything. 10 sets of human remains, buried in plain sight, just 40 miles from New York City. More than 14 years later, no killer has ever been charged, no federal arrest has ever been made, and the FBI has stayed almost completely silent. Why? What does America's most powerful law enforcement agency know that it refuses to tell the public? It began with a single phone call. In May of 2010, a woman named Shannon Gilbert called 911 from a home on Ocean Parkway. She was terrified, screaming that someone was trying to kill her. Then the line went dead. Shannon was a 24-year-old woman from New Jersey. Police searched briefly, found nothing, and moved on. They assumed she had simply run away. But when investigators returned months later, searching for Shannon, they found something far worse. Hidden in the dense brush along Gilgo Beach, carefully wrapped remains, then more and more. 4 victims in the first sweep, all female, all sex workers who had advertised on Craigslist. The discovery sent shockwaves through law enforcement. This was not a single crime of passion. This was organized, methodical, calculated, the work of a serial killer who had operated for years without detection, and yet the case would not be solved. Not in 2010, not in 2015, not in 2020. To this day, it remains officially open. The victims have names: Melissa Barthelemy, 24 years old, from New Jersey; Amberlynn Costello, 27 years old, from North Babylon, New York; Megan Waterman, 22 years old, from Scarborough, Maine; Maureen Brainard-Barnes, 25 years old, from Norwich, Connecticut. These 4 women are known as the Gilgo 4, but they were not alone. As the search expanded, investigators found 6 more sets of remains nearby. Among them, a toddler, a man in women's clothing, an Asian male, victims whose identities took years to establish, whose families waited in silence, not knowing if their loved ones were dead or alive. Criminologists noted something disturbing about the burial sites. They were not random. The locations were chosen with geographic precision, close to a major highway, accessible by car, concealed by natural vegetation. This was not someone unfamiliar with the area. Profilers concluded the killer almost certainly lived or worked on Long Island, had access to law enforcement channels or insider knowledge, and critically, had enough confidence to revisit the sites multiple times over multiple years. What happened next, or more accurately, what did not happen, is what makes this case extraordinary. The Suffolk County Police Department took the lead. Their then chief, James Burke, became the public face of the investigation. Burke projected confidence, promised answers, but behind closed doors, the investigation was fracturing. In 2016, James Burke was sentenced to 46 months in federal prison for beating a man who had stolen his bag from his car, a bag that allegedly contained sex toys, pornography, and prescription pills. Burke had also ordered his detectives to cover up the assault. He had compromised witnesses. He had obstructed justice. The lead investigator on America's most prominent active serial killer case was a convicted federal criminal. Former detectives later told journalists that Burke's behavior had poisoned the investigation from the start. Key evidence had been mishandled. Witnesses were not re-interviewed, and cooperation with federal agencies, including the FBI, was actively discouraged. For years, the FBI offered assistance. For years, that assistance was deflected. When Burke finally went to prison, it was too late. Evidence had degraded, leads had gone cold, and the killer, whoever he was, had vanished. Here is where the story becomes something else entirely. The FBI has been involved with this case in some capacity since 2011. Their forensic lab processed evidence. Their behavioral analysts profiled the killer. Their victim identification unit worked the unidentified remains. And yet, the Bureau has never held a press conference on this case, has never released a public profile of the suspect, has never issued a wanted bulletin. In contrast, for cases with far fewer victims, the FBI regularly goes public. They post profiles, they offer rewards, they name persons of interest. Why the silence here? Several investigative journalists who have covered this case for years have pointed to a recurring pattern in the documents they obtain through Freedom of Information Act requests. Redactions, entire pages blacked out. References to unnamed individuals described only as, quote, known to law enforcement. One theory that has circulated, and that federal sources have neither confirmed nor denied, is that a suspect or suspects may have had connections to law enforcement themselves. This would explain the institutional reluctance, the interagency friction, the years of public silence from a bureau that is rarely shy about high-profile cases. It would also explain why, when a suspect was finally named in 2022, the announcement came not from the FBI, but from a newly formed state task force. In July 2023, Rex Heuermann was arrested, a 59-year-old architect from Massapequa Park, Long Island. He had lived less than 3 miles from the Gilgo beach burial sites. For decades, investigators said they had DNA evidence matching samples from the victims. A pizza crust discarded near his Midtown Manhattan office, burner phone records, a Chevrolet Avalanche matching witness descriptions, a behavioral profile that matched perfectly. Heuermann was charged with the murders of 3 of the Gilgo 4. He pleaded not guilty. The case appeared, finally, to be moving toward resolution, but investigators and journalists who examined the arrest closely noted something the headlines had largely glossed over. Heuermann had been on law enforcement's radar for years. His name had surfaced in earlier investigations, and yet he had not been arrested in 2010, not in 2015, not in 2020. The technology that finally caught him, cell tower data, DNA genealogy testing, had been available to investigators years before his arrest. Cell tower tracking available from 2015, DNA genealogy testing available from 2018. Both were used only in 2022 and 2023. So the question being asked by legal analysts, by victims' families, and by the journalists who have followed this case for over a decade is simple. Why did it take 13 years? And if Heuermann is the killer, who protected him? The FBI, as of this recording, has still issued no public statement on its role, its findings, or its timeline in this investigation. 10 victims, 14 years, 1 arrest, with charges still pending, and a federal agency whose files on this case remain, to this day, largely sealed. The families of the Gilgo victims are still waiting for answers, not just about who did this, but about why it took so long, and whether anyone in a position of power helped a killer walk free for over a decade. This is Vantage Dossier. We don't stop at the headline. If this investigation raised questions for you, share this video, subscribe, and watch our follow-up report. The evidence the prosecution has not yet made public. The full dossier is just beginning,